Yeah, and just back to the Nancy Guthrie case, I'm just thinking whoever took Nancy,
Hmm.
if Mexico was the destination, should we be considering that they went through the reservation? Is that, in your mind, is that a possibility?
Yes, because there's nothing that there's no markers that say you're on the reservation now, you're not on the reservation, and most of that desert area west of Tucson, which are the pretty much the super highways of getting in and out of Mexico, that is all reservation. So, if I were saying, is it practical or probable? I would say yes, just because the areas that aren't reservation land tend to be closer to the metro areas like Nogales and Sassabee. Even Sassabee is very close to the reservation. Douglas, if you start going east, and there's just more eyes there, more resources, more sensors, more cameras, things like that. So the short answer is yes, it should be. And the probability, if I were a betting man and someone said they absolutely went to Mexico, I'd say they probably went through the reservation at some point.
What does it look like? I mean, like again, I'm just envisioning Nogales because you
Mhm.
drove through the checkpoint. If you were going to drive into Mexico through the reservation, like what would that look like?
Once you start getting, west of 286, which is the kind of the last north-south road that goes down to Sassabee, the point of entry there. Everything else turns into just there's a bunch of dirt roads, a bunch of fire roads and things like that. So some of them are relatively easily to drive through, but then you start getting into the Baba Kivari Mountains, and you have to go over mountains, and the further west you go, which once you start getting into Cells, which is about 80 to 100 miles west of Tucson, I'm not nearly as familiar with the ways south down there as I'm a little closer to the Three Points area. But there are all kinds of, like I said, just dirt roads that have turned into routes, and usually they're washes that are easy to drive for vehicles and things like that. So there are a lot of just natural routes that have turned into these roads for the smugglers of whatever they might be smuggling to get in and out. And going back to the easiest answer, it is relatively easy because of how big it is. We've seen that already, how vast it is, and just the amount of resources that the reservation, the tribal police have. Versus the Border Patrol and other federal agencies that might be working on the reservation, but out there, those numbers dwindle because there isn't as much activity as there is in more of the metro areas. So it's resource management.
The 31st of January 2026, a Saturday night in Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, spends the evening at the home of her daughter, Annie Guthrie, and her son-in-law. Later that night, her son-in-law drives her home to the Catalina foothills, an upscale, quiet stretch of the city, and drops her off. It's a routine she's done countless times. 2 minutes after she walks inside, her garage door closes. Shortly after that, the doorbell camera mounted at her front door goes offline. No alert reaches anyone that night. No call is made. The house goes quiet, and for the next several hours, nobody outside that home has any reason to think something is wrong. This is a real, ongoing investigation, and parts of this case are difficult to hear. We'll keep this factual, but viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Cold Case News Nation. This channel exists for one reason: to track real missing person cases using verified information, not guesswork or recycled rumors. If that's the kind of true crime coverage you're looking for, subscribe now, because we will update this case every time something is confirmed and not a moment before. So, who is Nancy Guthrie, and why did her disappearance reach nearly every major news outlet in the country within days? She is a grandmother from Tucson, Arizona, with a private life. She is also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. That connection meant cameras, reporters, and national attention arrived on this case faster than almost any missing adult case in recent memory. But her daughter's fame is not what makes this case worth following. The facts are, by the morning of February 1st, nobody had reported her missing yet. She had plans. She was supposed to join friends to watch a live stream of their church service that morning. She never showed up. That absence is the detail that started everything. Not a phone call from her, not a witness, not a sighting. Just a woman known for keeping her word, suddenly missing from something she had never missed before. That absence is where this case truly begins. Investigators have pieced together a more precise timeline since those first chaotic days, and it starts with a detail most people overlook. Nancy Guthrie wore a pacemaker. That pacemaker connected to her phone over Bluetooth, and it logged a final sync at a specific point overnight. Investigators treat that last connection as the moment she was most likely moved out of range of her own phone, which gives them a working estimate of when she was actually taken, separate from when her family first noticed something was wrong the next morning. That gap between the overnight removal and the morning discovery is where almost everything else in this case lives. The doorbell camera is the next major piece, and the way investigators recovered it is one of the more unusual parts of this entire case. Nancy's physical Nest camera was gone. It wasn't sitting broken on her porch, it wasn't in evidence, it had simply disappeared along with her. On top of that, she didn't have an active cloud subscription, which under normal circumstances means there's no backup footage stored anywhere. By every standard explanation, that footage should not exist. The FBI worked directly with Google to recover it anyway, and what they pulled back became the centerpiece of the entire public investigation. That footage shows a man standing at her front door. He's wearing a ski mask, gloves, and long sleeves. He's carrying an Ozark Trail backpack, and on his hip, clearly visible, is a holstered handgun. In the footage, he appears to be tampering directly with the camera itself, which lines up with why the device went offline so quickly after Nancy arrived home that night. For weeks, that image was treated as a single moment, captured the morning she disappeared. Then investigators found something that changed how they were reading the entire case. One of the images released by the FBI was taken on a different date than the others, weeks earlier than February 1st. That means this wasn't a person who showed up once and acted on impulse. Someone in a mask had already stood at that same door weeks in advance, before the night Nancy went missing. That detail lines up with something a neighbor reported separately. A woman named Aldine Meister, who had lived in the Catalina foothills for nearly 3 decades, told reporters she saw a young man walking through the neighborhood about 2 weeks before Nancy disappeared. She said he wasn't dressed like someone exercising or walking a dog. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and she'd never seen him before, and never saw him again after that day. 2 separate pieces of evidence, gathered weeks apart by 2 different sources, are now pointing at the same window of time. Someone appears to have been watching that house before February 1st ever arrived. Now, here's a question for you. Out of everything we just covered, which detail actually surprised you the most? The missing camera that somehow still produced footage? Or the idea that the suspect had scouted the house weeks in advance? Drop it in the comments, because the answers people give on this video genuinely shape what we dig into next. One more piece closed off an early angle in this case. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed publicly that every member of Nancy's own family had been cleared as suspects. That ruled out the most obvious starting point in any disappearance investigation, and it pushed investigators toward exactly the kind of unknown subject they were now staring at in that doorbell footage. A masked man, armed, methodical enough to return to the same house more than once, and at that point, completely unidentified. With that timeline locked in, investigators had a clear before and after picture of the crime. What they didn't have yet was anything connecting that masked figure to an identity. Finding one is where the case went next. With no identity yet attached to the masked figure on that doorbell footage, investigators turned to whatever physical evidence the scene itself could offer, and the first major piece came in the form of a pair of gloves. A pair of gloves was recovered near Nancy's home in the weeks following her disappearance, flagged because they resembled the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell video. DNA testing came back in 2 parts. The DNA on the gloves did not match anything in CODIS, the national database that flags prior offenders, and it also did not match any DNA recovered inside Nancy's home. That doesn't clear anyone, and it doesn't point at anyone either. It tells investigators the gloves likely belong to someone with no criminal record on file, or that they may not be connected to this case at all. A negative result like that rules out a quick match, which is usually the fastest way a case like this gets solved early. While forensic testing moved through the lab, investigators also tried a more unconventional approach in the field. Because Nancy relied on a pacemaker, authorities deployed a device known informally as a signal sniffer, flown by helicopter over stretches of desert outside Tucson. attempting to detect any signal still being emitted from that device. As of the most recent public updates, that search has not produced a confirmed result. It remains one of the more unusual tools used in this investigation, and one investigators haven't ruled out using again. On February 10th, a man named Carlos became briefly connected to the case after he was stopped during a traffic stop near Rio Rico, a town south of Tucson, close to the border. Carlos worked a delivery job in the area and was questioned in relation to Nancy's disappearance. He told reporters it was possible he had delivered packages to her address at some point, though he said he did not personally know her. Investigators searched a property connected to him under court authorization. Nothing tying him to Nancy's disappearance was found, and he was released without charges. A separate name entered the conversation in late May, when the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a wanted alert for a woman named Coral Michelle Smith in connection with an unrelated kidnapping and aggravated assault case that occurred less than 7 miles from Nancy's home. Investigators have been clear they have not established any link between Smith's case and Nancy's disappearance. Her name drew attention mainly because of that proximity, combined with a record that includes a dismissed kidnapping charge and a separate robbery conviction. None of that amounts to a connection. It amounts to 2 cases that investigators have to rule out, not assume. That kind of process is fairly standard, according to retired homicide detective Chris McDonough, who has worked a number of high-profile cold cases. He's noted that investigators in missing person cases like this one will often cast a wide net, checking out names and incidents that ultimately have nothing to do with the case, simply because ruling something out is still progress. Meanwhile, Nancy's family has continued to push the investigation forward from outside law enforcement entirely. Savannah Guthrie has publicly offered a $1 million reward for information leading to her mother, and separately committed $500,000 toward hiring a private investigator to work the case independently. None of these threads, the gloves, the helicopter search, Carlos, or Coral Michelle Smith, have produced a breakthrough yet. But each one removes a possibility, and that's how a case like this moves, even when nothing makes headlines for weeks at a time. If you want those updates as they land, instead of waiting for the next viral headline, subscribing is the most reliable way to catch them, because forensic results in this case have been arriving days apart with almost no warning. Almost from the moment Nancy Guthrie's disappearance became public, theories about Mexico started circulating. The reasoning made sense to plenty of people watching from outside the case. Tucson sits less than 70 miles from the border, and within that same stretch of desert lies a piece of land more massive than many people realize, the Tohono O'odham Nation, a reservation that runs for roughly 100 miles west of Tucson and physically extends across the international line into Mexico itself. To understand whether that geography actually matters here, we spoke with retired FBI agent Steve Moore, who spent years working as a liaison between the Bureau and tribal nations, including time alongside his father, who held a similar position decades earlier. Moore explained that federal law enforcement holds full jurisdiction on tribal land, contrary to a common assumption that reservations operate entirely under their own legal system. The FBI, he said, technically has authority over every crime committed there, down to traffic violations, though in practice, agents work alongside tribal police rather than overriding them. When it came to the specific theory of someone using the reservation to slip into Mexico undetected, Moore was more skeptical than viewers might expect. He pointed to smart wall infrastructure along sections of the border, fencing equipped with constant camera coverage, motion sensors, and in some areas, a tethered aerial surveillance balloon capable of monitoring vehicle and foot traffic from thousands of feet up, helicopters equipped with night vision patrol stretches of that border after dark. In his assessment, a vehicle attempting to cross through that terrain would be far more likely to draw attention than one moving through a standard regulated crossing lane where thousands of vehicles pass through every day without individual scrutiny. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Kreger offered a different angle, built on years spent running the department's border crime unit directly inside that same stretch of desert. Kreger confirmed that resources thin out dramatically the farther west you move from Metro Tucson, leaving long stretches of reservation land with minimal patrol coverage compared to areas closer to official crossings. He also acknowledged something investigators rarely state outright on camera, that bribery of personnel on both sides of the border has occurred in past unrelated cases. He was careful to frame that as a known possibility within border enforcement generally, not as evidence of anything specific in Nancy's case. Outside experts brought in by other outlets have leaned in a different direction. At least one security expert who reviewed the surveillance density along that corridor assessed the likelihood of a cross-border abduction in this case as low, citing the same monitoring infrastructure Moore described. Investigators have not ruled the possibility out entirely, but they also haven't confirmed it as a working theory, which is the most accurate way to describe where this stands right now. A real possibility that remains entirely unconfirmed in either direction. To make that contrast easier to picture, it's worth revisiting footage from a trip our team took to Nogales months ago, crossing through the official port of entry with two local guides, Daniel and Mo, both fluent in Spanish. Walking across that border required almost nothing. No passport check, no questions, just a short walk past a checkpoint built for regulated traffic. While there, a local reporter named Omar, who covers the border region, told us the case was known locally, mainly because so many families in Nogales have relatives on the Tucson side. He said local police rarely release information directly to reporters, which limits how much coverage the case gets on that side of the border, regardless of how much attention it draws in Arizona. That gap between how easy the legal crossing felt and how heavily monitored the surrounding desert actually is exactly why this theory remains open. If you've made it this far, share this video. Cases like this move forward when more people see a specific detail and recognize it, and that has happened before in other investigations. In the first weeks of June, the case took on a more specific shape when a volunteer search group based in Mexico, Buscando Corazones Nogales, said they had received an anonymous tip claiming Nancy Guthrie had been buried in a grave near the border. The group, which regularly searches for missing persons in that region, coordinated with local authorities and carried out a search based on that tip. Mexican officials addressed the claim directly, stating publicly that it lacked verifiable supporting evidence. No remains were located during that search. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded with its own statement, posted under Sheriff Chris Nanos's name, confirming that at that point, they had not been contacted by Mexican authorities regarding the tip, and reaffirming that the investigation remained active and ongoing. Worth noting, that statement doesn't confirm or deny anything about the tip itself. It simply clarifies who had and had not been in direct contact at that stage. A separate piece of physical evidence surfaced just days before that, in late May, when a pajama top was discovered in a desert area near Highway 79, roughly 30 minutes from Nancy's home. Sheriff's deputies responded to the scene and collected the item for evidence. As of now, that pajama top has not been publicly confirmed as belonging to Nancy, and investigators have not released results connecting it directly to her case. It remains exactly what it was the day it was found. A piece of evidence under evaluation, not a confirmed answer. Online, a different kind of theory picked up traction around the same time. A cybersecurity firm published commentary describing Nancy's disappearance as a possible example of what's known in the industry as a wrench attack, a term used when someone is targeted physically rather than hacked digitally in an attempt to gain access to a cryptocurrency wallet. The firm's post suggested a hypothetical multi-million-dollar Bitcoin ransom angle, framing Nancy as a potential proxy target due to her daughter's public profile. It's important to be precise about what this is. It's a theory published by a private company, not a finding confirmed by the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and no law enforcement statement has supported that framing as of this recording. That distinction matters more than usual in this case, because of how much unverified content has surrounded it from the beginning. In June alone, several online streamers were cited or arrested near Nancy's home after complaints from neighbors, including one individual arrested twice in the same week for public nuisance and resisting arrest. These were people showing up to film outside an active investigation, not individuals connected to the case itself, but their presence says something about how much noise has built up around it. That's exactly the gap this channel exists to close. A tip surfaces, a theory goes viral, a streamer gets arrested outside a family's home. And within days, it's nearly impossible to tell which of those things actually moved the case forward and which ones simply moved across social media. Most of them don't hold up. Some of them do. If you want to know which is which without sorting through it yourself, subscribe and turn on notifications, because new claims in this case are surfacing almost weekly, and we're only covering the ones that hold up to verification. Let me verify the current details before writing this, particularly the monsoon timing, the lab work explanation, and the tip line information, since accuracy matters most for a closing chapter like this. Good. This confirms the lab work explanation. One more check on the family's public effort reward and current FBI tip line details to make sure those are accurate and current. This confirms the actual tip lines are FBI 1800CA, LLFBI, tips.fbi.gov, and the Pima County BOD. Sheriff's Department Non-Emergency Tip Line 520-3514900, not 88 Crime, which appears to be a different, unrelated tip program, likely a mix-up with Arizona's 88 Crime Silent Witness program, which I have no evidence is actually tied to this case. I'll use the verified numbers rather than risk publishing a wrong tip line in a true crime piece, where that's about the worst kind of error to make. Here's where things actually are, as of this recording. No arrest, no suspect named publicly, and a sheriff who is, by his own account, still waiting on science to catch up with the case. In a June interview with KOL News 13, Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the question everyone keeps asking: why, after more than 4 months, is there still no one in custody? His answer wasn't evasive. It was procedural. He described a process bottlenecked by laboratory work, not by a lack of leads. DNA analysis, he explained, isn't instant, and it isn't optional to rush. He put it plainly, it's not as simple as a detective talking to someone and making an arrest. The labs have rules, he said. And even though DNA testing isn't a perfect science, it's close enough that those rules have to be followed all the way through. That's not the language of a man stalling. It's the language of a man trying to make sure that whatever comes out of this case holds up once it gets in front of a jury. There's also a more practical pressure now layered on top of the forensic one. Arizona's monsoon season runs from mid-June through mid-September, and it is not a minor seasonal detail in a case like this. Heavy, sudden rainfall in the desert doesn't just inconvenience a search, it can erase what a search is looking for. Outdoor evidence, disturbed ground, anything time and weather can degrade, all of it becomes harder to read with every storm that rolls through. If there is unrecovered evidence still sitting somewhere in that landscape, the clock on it just started running differently. So where does that leave the 3 threads we've followed? The local lead, centered on the home itself, the mixed DNA, the masked figure on the doorbell camera, remains the most concrete and the most unresolved. The border theory, the anonymous tip, and the search that followed it ended without remains and without confirmation either way. The financial motive theory, the wrench attack framing tied to Bitcoin and her daughter's profile, remains a theory law enforcement has acknowledged hearing. Not one it has confirmed. None of the 3 has been ruled out. None of the 3 has won. That's not a failure of the investigation. That's what an open case actually looks like while it's still open. Through all of it, Nancy's family has kept showing up publicly, a reward, a private investigator brought in alongside law enforcement, not instead of it. Repeated, plain appeals for anyone with real information to come forward, not theater, just a family still asking. If you have information, the people who need to hear it directly are the FBI, at 1-800-CALL-FBI, or through tips.fbi.gov, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department's tip line. Not a comment section. Them. We'll keep separating what moves this case forward from what just moves online. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll see you for the next one that holds up.